Welcome to CSS Tutorial Introduction. We're going to start off by answering few questions. What CSS stands for? CSS stands for Cascading Style Sheets. And why CSS? CSS is for giving a style to a web page and makes a page stand out more and also makes it more noticeable. So that is why we need CSS. Now before we get into CSS, we will be needing two things. First is a browser and second is a code editor. For a browser, I will either recommend Google Chrome or Firefox. For code editor, you can download Visual Studio Code, Notepad++, or Brackets. I will leave all the links down in the description so you can pick one as you like. Now let's jump into CSS Tutorial Part 1. Let's go over on how we can define CSS for a HTML document. I'm going to go over a number of ways that you can have CSS for a HTML file. First, we can create inline CSS, which means you can apply CSS right within HTML element. So for example, we can create CSS for this H1, create an attribute style equals to, and in double quotes we can define CSS for this HTML element. So this is called inline CSS. We can define our CSS right within head tag. Inside the head tag we can create style tag, and inside the style tag we can define our CSS in here as well. Or a third way, which is probably most efficient way of creating CSS, is by creating a CSS file. So right here I have created a CSS folder, and within that folder I have a file called mycss.css. CSS file uses an extension .css, and you can have all your CSS created here, but you do have to refer to that file in your HTML head section. So for that we can create a link tag, call it an attribute rel style sheet, which means that this is a CSS file and is referring to that. And we can define the path to our CSS file. So we have a folder called CSS, and inside we have my CSS. So we can create CSS like this, and this is much more efficient than creating within a head section or applying it inline CSS right within HTML element. So these are a number of ways that we can define CSS for a HTML document. Let's talk about CSS Syntax. I will be using a CSS file to apply my CSS. As you can see here, I have a folder called CSS created, and within I have my CSS.css file, and I will be referring this file in my index.html file. As you can see, I'm linking my CSS file using a link tag. Now I have this h3 here, which I will be applying the styling too. Now back to my CSS file. I'm going to have h3, opening and closing brackets, have color blue. As you can see, color blue is applied to h3 tag, and this is CSS syntax. h3 is selector, color is property, and blue is the value. So selector, property, colon, value, and ends with a semicolon. So this is how we can apply CSS, and this is what CSS syntax looks like. We can have more than one property for a selector. So we have our first property color and have a value of blue. Now we can have second property, let's say font size, and have a value of 25 pixels, which will apply font size of 25 pixels to h3 text here. So we can have more than one property for a selector. Just make sure after each property value you do have a semicolon. If you miss a semicolon at the end, it will give you an error and CSS will be not applied. So since I'm using a code editor, Visual Studio Code, it is smart enough to notice that I have missed a semicolon at the end, and it will give a red underlining, and when I hover over, it will say semicolon expected, and it will also give you the property syntax color. So we can apply that fix to solve our problem. So you can have more than one property for a selector, and each of the property will need a semicolon at the end, which is a requirement. So you end value in a semicolon. Thank you for watching CSS tutorial part 1. Subscribe to this channel for continued learning, and also hit that bell icon so you can stay tuned for upcoming videos. I will see you next time.